Nora had learned 3 rules for surviving exile in the frozen wastes. Never trust strangers, never waste resources, and never, ever open the door after dark. So when the scratching came, weak, desperate, dying, she knew breaking that 3rd rule would probably kill her. Nora Chin pressed her palms against the rough wooden door of the abandoned hunter's cabin, feeling the wind rattle the hinges. 6 months since Lord Dorian Ashcroft's testimony before the council. 6 months since he'd looked her in the eye and called her a seductress who'd poisoned his innocent wife, when the truth was his wife had been dying from his fists, not Nora's herbs. The northern wastes were meant to be her grave. No Omega survived a winter this far from civilization. No one was supposed to. The scratching came again, weaker now, accompanied by a sound that made every hair on Nora's neck stand rigid, a whimper, distinctly animal, but massive, carrying the bone-deep resonance of something ancient and powerful. She pressed her ear to the frozen wood, her herbalist's instinct screaming at her to help while her survival sense demanded she stay hidden. Nothing innocent came begging at the doors of the exiled. Nothing good traveled through blizzards to find the condemned. When Nora finally cracked the door open, her breath died in her throat. A shadow wolf lay collapsed across her threshold, half buried in snow. Not just any wolf. This creature was enormous, midnight matted with ice and something darker. Blood pooled beneath the massive body, steaming against the frozen ground as the storm howled its fury around them. But it was the grotesquely swollen belly that made Nora's hands move before her mind could stop them. This wolf was heavily pregnant, and someone had been starving her to death. They sent you to die too, Nora whispered, seeing her own fate reflected in those amber eyes, the same helpless desperation she'd felt when the council chose Dorian's lies over her truth, when they condemned her for rejecting a predator's advances. The wolf lifted her head with agonizing effort, and in those intelligent eyes, Nora recognized the same silent plea she'd once made before the council, the same words that no one had believed. Save me. Whatever it costs, someone please save me. For one frozen heartbeat, Nora stood paralyzed. 6 months of isolation had taught her that survival meant keeping your door locked, your head down, your compassion buried. She was Omega, worth less than the snow she melted for water, worth less than the firewood that kept her alive. Opening this door meant Dorian's hunters would find her. Meant torture, meant death. But she remembered standing in that throne room, voice shaking as she begged them to investigate Dorian's abuse. Remembered the cold satisfaction in his eyes as he destroyed her reputation with elegant lies. She had been powerless to save herself. She had failed his wife, who died in silence. She would not fail this mother. I never was good at following rules anyway, Nora muttered, grabbing the wolf's matted scruff with both hands. Her muscles screamed as she pulled. Come on then, brave girl. Let's both be stupid enough to believe mercy still matters. Hello, beautiful souls. Quick question. If saving one starving creature meant facing a king's wrath and a trafficking ring's vengeance, would you open your door? Or would you choose survival over mercy? Thank you so much for being here. It truly means everything to me. I'm on this journey to grow my channel and share stories about survivors who refuse to stay silent. If Nora's choice is already pulling at your heart, please hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your support helps more than you know. Now let's get back to what happens when an exiled Omega and a dying wolf both decide that survival isn't enough, not when justice is still possible. The door slammed shut against the blizzard's rage. Inside, by the meager light of her dying fire, Nora's herbalist training took over completely. The wolf was too massive to lift, so Nora dragged her across the rough wooden floor, leaving a trail of melted snow and blood that would stain the planks for weeks. Her shoulders burned, her hands went numb from gripping the frozen fur, but she didn't stop until the creature lay beside the struggling fire. By firelight, the full horror revealed itself. This wasn't injury from a hunting accident or territorial fight. This was systematic destruction, methodical and deliberate. The wolf's ribs jutted through matted black fur like prison bars, each bone visible beneath skin stretched too tight. Nora had treated starvation before, Dorian's wife near the end. Other Omegas denied resources as punishment, but nothing like this. This body had been kept alive at the absolute threshold of death for weeks, maybe months. Her healer's hands moved automatically, checking for wounds, assessing damage. Then her fingers brushed against the wolf's ribcage and froze.
Scars.
Silver-burned scars forming letters across the heaving ribs.
Property.
Lot 23. Nora's stomach turned violently. Someone had branded this wolf like livestock. Had used silver, the one metal that burned shifter flesh permanently, to carve ownership into living skin. The scar tissue was raised, deliberate, designed to hurt long after the initial burning stopped. Gods, she whispered, her hands trembling as they moved lower. Infection-ravaged claw marks across the wolf's haunches. Rope burns circled all four legs where restraints had cut deep enough to scar. And the swollen belly. Nora pressed careful fingers against it, feeling the flutter of multiple heartbeats. The pregnant belly bore bruises in distinct patterns. Boot prints. Fist-sized impacts. Someone had beaten this mother repeatedly, targeting the unborn young she carried. Rage flooded through Nora, white-hot and consuming. Her healer's training demanded clinical detachment, but there was nothing clinical about deliberate torture. Someone had done this slowly, purposefully, keeping this wolf alive just barely enough to suffer. To break her. She grabbed her precious herb stores, the ones she'd hoarded for her own survival, and began working. Yarrow for the bleeding. Comfrey paste for the burns. Willow bark tea for pain and fever. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning infection, treating wounds, whispering soothing nonsense the way she had to Dorian's wife in those final days when there was nothing left but comfort. As she pressed a cloth soaked in feverfew extract against the wolf's burning forehead, her fingers made direct contact with the creature's skin. The world exploded. Nora gasped as the vision slammed into her consciousness. Not her memory, but someone else's, vivid and terrible and absolutely real. She stood in a sunlit forest, gathering herbs in a woven basket.
Peace.
Safety. Home. Then chains, silver chains wrapping around her legs, burning through fur and flesh. Hands dragging her into darkness. A warehouse, massive and cold, filled with cages. Other wolves trapped inside, pregnant like her, starving, their eyes hollow with despair. The vision accelerated. Days blurred together. Forced starvation, water just enough to keep them alive, pain designed to break spirits rather than kill. A man's face came into focus, handsome in a cruel way, his smile casual as he kicked her swollen belly. "Break faster," he said, his voice bored. "Foreign buyers prefer compliant merchandise." Captain Veron. The name surfaced from the wolf's memory along with pure, distilled terror. The vision shattered like glass. Nora fell backward, gasping, her hands flying away from the wolf's forehead. Her cabin spun. Her stomach heaved. She'd experienced trauma memories before through touch, a rare gift among herbalist Omegas, but never anything this violent, this deliberately cruel. A voice entered her mind, weak and threadbare but unmistakably present. "They took me from my mate." From Eric. Nora's head snapped toward the wolf, whose amber eyes were open now, watching her with exhausted awareness. "He's searching," the mental voice continued, each word seeming to cost tremendous effort. "But they moved me too many times. Different warehouses. Different cages. I just want to go home. Want him to know I tried. That I fought." "Eric," Nora repeated aloud, her mind racing. There was only one Eric powerful enough that his name alone carried weight. Lycan King Eric, who'd ruled the 4 territories for a decade with absolute authority. The strongest alpha in 3 generations. Horror crystallized in her chest, cold and absolute. This wasn't just any shadow wolf some trafficking ring had captured. This was the queen. The Lycan King's true mate, stolen and tortured and branded like livestock. And whoever orchestrated this, whoever ordered the abduction, the starvation, the systematic breaking of the kingdom's most powerful shifter's wife, had just made an enemy that would burn the world to find her. "They don't know you escaped," Nora whispered, understanding flooding through her. They're still looking for you. Still think you're in their custody. I ran during transport. 3 weeks ago. Followed something. Safety. Couldn't shift back. Too weak. Just kept running. The wolf's eyes closed briefly.
Found you.
Nora looked down at her trembling hands, at the blood and herbs staining her fingers, at the impossible creature she'd just dragged into her cabin. She'd thought opening that door meant risking Dorian's hunters. She hadn't realized she was opening the door to a kingdom-shattering conspiracy that trafficked royalty. And somewhere out there, a Lycan king was searching desperately for his shattered mate, following cold trails and false leads, while she lay dying in an exile's cabin at the edge of the world. Your name, Nora said quietly. What's your name?
Sarah.
All right, Sarah. Nora's voice steadied, her healer's resolve crystallizing into something harder. You survived 3 months of hell and 3 weeks running on nothing but willpower. You're not dying in my cabin. Whatever it takes, whoever comes for you, we fight. She pressed another cloth to the infected wounds, feeling Sarah's labored breathing beneath her hands. Outside, the blizzard howled its fury, and somewhere in the darkness, hunters were likely already tracking their missing merchandise. But Nora had made her choice the moment she opened that door. And she'd learned long ago that once you decided mercy mattered more than survival, there was no going back. 3 days. That's how long Nora had before mercy became a death sentence. The first day, Sarah couldn't lift her head without whimpering. Nora spooned bone broth between her jaws, one careful mouthful at a time, watching for signs of rejection. The wolf's body was so broken that even sustenance felt like violence. But she kept it down.
Barely.
The second day, Sarah managed to drink on her own. Her eyes tracked Nora's movements around the cabin with awareness instead of the glazed desperation of the dying. Through careful touches, fragments of story emerged in Nora's mind. Not full visions this time, but impressions. A forest glade where Sarah had been gathering medicinal roots. Strong hands clamping silver chains before she could cry warning. The sickening realization that she'd been watched, tracked, chosen specifically because she was pregnant and vulnerable. They take mothers, Sarah's mental voice whispered during a bandage change. Pregnant shifters. The unborn make US compliant.
Desperate.
We won't fight if it risks the young. Nora's hands stilled on the herb paste she was preparing. How many? I saw 30 cages. Maybe more in other locations. Sarah's amber eyes reflected firelight and something darker, survivor's guilt. Some had already given birth. They took their pups immediately, before the maternal bond could form. The mothers, they broke. Completely. The pups. Nora almost didn't want to know. Sold to foreign kingdoms. Their blood has properties before they bond with parents. Magical experimentation. Sarah's body shuddered. None survive past 2 years. I heard the guards talking, bragging about prices. By the third day, Sarah could stand for brief moments. The infection had receded enough that Nora could feel multiple strong heartbeats when she checked the swollen belly. 3 pups, all fighting to survive in a body that shouldn't be able to sustain them. Small miracles built on willpower and Nora's dwindling herb stores. They were sharing a quiet afternoon, Nora mending her threadbare cloak, Sarah resting by the fire, when the horses came. The sound carried through the blizzard like a death knell. Multiple riders, moving with purpose, surrounding the cabin in practiced formation. Nora's blood went cold. She'd known this moment was coming, had prepared herself for it, but preparation meant nothing against the primal terror flooding her system. Sarah's head snapped up, lips pulling back from teeth too large for mercy. Despite 3 days of healing, she was still skeletal, still weak, but a mother's protective fury blazed in those amber eyes. The door didn't open. It exploded inward. 6 hunters poured through, weapons drawn, moving with military precision. They wore dark leather stamped with an unfamiliar crest, a broken chain wreathed in thorns.
Mercenaries, then.
Well-paid ones. They spread through the small cabin like infection, blocking exits, trapping prey. The last man ducked under the doorframe with casual arrogance. Tall, broad-shouldered, handsome in the way predators often are. His smile was the worst part, warm and charming and utterly devoid of conscience. Captain Veron. Nora recognized him from Sarah's memories, though seeing him in person was worse. He radiated cruelty the way normal men radiated heat. "Well," Veron said, his voice pleasant. "Found our missing merchandise. Lord Dorian will be pleased." His eyes swept the cabin, cataloging details with professional efficiency before landing on Nora. Recognition flickered across his features. And look, the disgraced Omega. This just became very convenient. Nora stood, placing herself between Veron and Sarah. Her heart slammed against her ribs hard enough to hurt, but her voice came out steady.
Leave. Now.
"While you still can." Veron laughed, genuine amusement lighting his handsome face. "Return Lord Dorian's property, Omega, and we'll pretend you didn't steal valuable merchandise. We might even let you keep breathing." "She's not property." The words came out harder than Nora intended, edged with 3 days of rage at what these men had done. "She's a person. A queen. And you've made a terrible mistake." "A queen?" Veron's smile widened. "Is that what she told you?"
Sweet.
"No, little Omega. That's Lot 23, premium breeding stock awaiting sale to the Nordian Dominion. Worth more gold than you'll see in 10 lifetimes." He gestured casually to his men. "Secure them both. The wolf goes back in the cage. The Omega." His eyes traveled over Nora with calculated assessment that made her skin crawl. "Lord Dorian said we can do whatever we want with you before we bring you back. Apparently, you caused him considerable trouble 6 months ago. He's very interested in correcting your behavior personally, but he won't mind if we soften you up first." The hunters moved forward as one. Sarah's snarl shattered the cabin's contained air, a sound too massive for her broken body, carrying alpha bloodline authority that made 2 hunters actually step back. Despite barely being able to stand, despite starvation and torture and 3 weeks running on nothing but desperation, she positioned herself between Nora and Veron's men, protecting the woman who'd saved her. Nora grabbed the fire poker, her hands white-knuckled on the iron. She'd treated wounds and mixed herbs and saved lives, but she'd never killed anyone. Never even seriously hurt anyone. But looking at Veron's casual smile, at his men advancing with that particular anticipation predators wear before violence, she discovered something new beneath her healer's compassion. Absolute refusal. She would not be Dorian's victim again. Would not let these men take Sarah back to cages and starvation and eventual sale. Would not let them win because she was Omega, because she was small, because the system said powerful men could do whatever they wanted to the powerless. "Last chance," Nora said, her voice carrying an edge she didn't know she possessed. "Walk away." Veron's smile became something terrible and anticipatory. "I was hoping you'd fight. It's more fun that way." The first hunter lunged. The hunter lunged with practiced efficiency, expecting an easy target. Nora swung the fire poker with every ounce of desperate strength, connecting with his temple with a sickening crack that dropped him instantly. She didn't wait to see if he'd get up. Her free hand grabbed the clay pot of boiling water from the hearth, yarrow and valerian root steeped for Sarah's pain, and hurled it at the second hunter's face. His scream was immediate and gratifying. The paralytic herbs worked fast when introduced through mucous membranes. He clawed at his eyes, stumbling backward into furniture. Nora's herbalist training had taught her more than healing. She knew exactly where to strike to collapse a knee, which pressure points would drop a grown man, how human anatomy broke under precise force. The third hunter came at her with a knife. She sidestepped, drove her elbow into the nerve cluster below his ear, and used his forward momentum to slam his face into the stone hearth. 3 down. 3 still standing, plus Veron. Then hands like iron manacles closed around her wrist. Veron twisted with surgical precision, grinding bone against bone until white-hot agony exploded up her arm. The poker clattered from nerveless fingers. "There she is," Veron murmured, his mouth too close to her ear. "Lord Dorian told me about you. How you played innocent. How you refused his generosity, and then poisoned his wife out of spite. His breath was hot against her neck. He doesn't like when his toys say no. He's going to enjoy breaking you properly this time.
Slowly.
Until you beg for the privilege of serving him. Nora spat in his face. His answering backhand sent her sprawling, blood flooding her mouth. Through ringing ears, she heard Sarah's warning snarl. Then the massive shadow wolf launched herself at Veron with a mother's absolute fury. Sarah shouldn't have been able to move that fast. Shouldn't have had the strength. But maternal instinct transcended physical limitation. Her jaws closed around Veron's sword arm, fangs punching through leather and flesh with wet, tearing sounds. Veron's scream was high and shocked. He'd expected a broken, compliant animal. He got a queen protecting her healer. The distraction bought Nora 3 seconds. She grabbed the fire poker, now heated from lying near the coals, and drove it through the fourth hunter's thigh with both hands. The smell of burning flesh mixed with his anguished howl.
But there were too many.
Always too many. The fifth hunter's sword pommel crashed into Nora's skull from behind. The world fragmented into spinning darkness and nauseating pain. She hit the floor hard, tasting blood and smoke and failure. Through blurring vision, she watched Sarah release Veron's ruined arm and position herself over Nora's fallen body, snarling defiance despite the blood soaking her fur. Veron's face had gone beyond anger into something colder and infinitely more dangerous. He cradled his mangled arm, his handsome features twisted with rage. "Stupid bitch. You just cost me a fortune in healing fees." He drew back his boot and kicked Sarah's swollen belly with vicious, deliberate force. The sound Sarah made wasn't physical. It was psychic, a scream that exploded outward from her mind like a shockwave, carrying 3 months of torture and desperate love and absolute terror for her unborn young. Nora felt it tear through her consciousness even through the haze of concussion. Felt the psychic distress call race outward, carried on mate bond connection across impossible distances, screaming one name with everything Sarah had left. Eric.
Eric.
They're killing us.
Eric.
Veron kicked again, targeting the same spot with calculated cruelty. Sarah collapsed, whimpering, and the psychic scream cut off as consciousness fled. "Did you really think anyone would save you?" Veron snarled down at the unconscious wolf. "You're precious. Mate couldn't find you in 3 months.
He won't find you now.
And by the time we deliver you to the Nordians, those pups will be worth triple because of the trauma bonding enhancement." He turned to his remaining men, all business despite his ruined arm. "Chain them both. The wolf goes in the cage wagon. Silver restraints. I want her unable to shift or fight. The Omega." His eyes found Nora, still conscious but unable to move. "Bind her hands and throw her over a horse. Lord Dorian wants her alive enough to suffer. Everything else is negotiable." Rough hands dragged Nora upright. Silver chains burned against Sarah's unconscious form as hunters manhandled her toward the door. Nora tried to fight, but her skull was fractured, her vision swimming, her body refusing commands. They bound her wrists with rope that cut deep, then threw her across a saddle like cargo. The last thing she saw before they left the cabin was her 3 days of careful healing destroyed in minutes. Blood on the floor. Her precious herb scattered. The fire dying. Then they were moving through the blizzard, and Nora was watching her cabin, her sanctuary, her prison, her home, fade into darkness and snow. Sarah's unconscious body swayed in the cage wagon ahead, each bump threatening her unborn young. Everything Nora had risked, everything she'd fought for, being dragged back to the men who'd already destroyed them once. The storm swallowed all sound except the horses' labored breathing and Veron's orders to move faster. Then, cutting through wind and snow and despair, came a sound that made every hunter freeze.
A howl.
Not close, but massive enough to carry across miles. Ancient and enormous and filled with rage, so absolute it made the air itself feel dangerous. The howl of something that had heard its mate scream and was coming with vengeance in its teeth. Veron's face went pale in the moonlight. "Ride," he snapped.
Now.
"Ride." But they were already too late. Somewhere in the darkness, Lycan King Eric had finally found his queen's trail. And he was bringing the storm with him. 200 miles south, in the royal palace's war room, Lycan King Eric was reviewing border security reports when the world ended. The psychic scream hit him like a blade through the chest, not sound, but raw sensation transmitted across the mate bond he'd been desperately following for 3 months.
Eric, help.
They're hurting the pups. Sarah's voice, his Sarah, the mate he'd been searching for through endless false leads and cold trails, screaming in agony so absolute it stopped his heart. Eric's transformation was instantaneous. No conscious thought, no careful control. Pure instinct took over. Bones cracked and reformed. His body expanded upward, muscles rippling beneath midnight black fur. His Lycan form towered 10 feet tall, radiating alpha power that made every wolf in the palace drop to their knees in submission. He didn't notice.
Didn't care.
The mate bond thrummed in his chest like a compass pointing north, and Eric ran. He crashed through the war room's reinforced doors, 1,200 pounds of fur and fury moving with impossible speed. Courtiers scattered. Guards threw themselves aside. Eric hit the palace grounds at full sprint and simply kept accelerating. The city blurred past. Stone walls became obstacles to leap over, not go around. Citizens who saw him coming had the good sense to clear the streets. Your Majesty, his second, Commander Thorne, shifted mid-run to keep pace. Wait for the guard. We don't know what we're facing. Eric didn't slow. Couldn't slow. Every second wasted was another second Sarah suffered. The mate bond pulled him north like a physical rope, growing stronger with each mile. 3 months. 3 months of searching, of finding abandoned warehouses and empty cages, of following trails that went cold at river crossings. 3 months of sleeping alone in a bed that still smelled like her, of wondering if she was alive, if she was suffering, if she'd given up hope that he'd find her. And she'd been screaming for him, in agony, while someone hurt their pups. The forests became a blur of white and shadow. Mountains rose ahead, the Spine Range, where exiles went to die. Eric leaped ravines that should have been impassable, tore through snow drifts that would have buried normal wolves. Behind him, his elite guards struggled to maintain pace. He outran them all. 20 miles from a cabin he'd never seen, Eric caught the scent.
Blood.
Sarah's blood. And others, 6 male humans, horses, fear, sweat, and cruelty. The mate bond sang in his chest. So close now, right there, just ahead through the trees. He found them on the northern trade route, a cage wagon flanked by 6 mounted hunters moving at forced march speed. The cage held a massive shadow wolf, unconscious, chained in silver that burned even from a distance. Across one hunter's saddle lay a small figure, hands bound, bleeding. Eric's roar shattered the night. The sound was too large for any natural creature, alpha command mixed with a husband's rage and a father's protective fury. It rolled across the snow like thunder, shaking ice from tree branches, sending prey animals fleeing in pure primal terror. 5 hunters scattered immediately, abandoning their mounts, running blindly into the forest. Survival instinct overrode training, loyalty, everything. Only the captain remained, sword drawn, facing Eric with the desperate courage of a man who knew he was already dead. The Crown has no jurisdiction over Lord Dorian's legitimate business transactions, Captain Veron said, his voice steady despite the terror in his eyes. These are registered commercial goods being transported under. Eric's clawed hand closed around Veron's throat, lifting him off his horse with effortless strength.
You.
Hurt.
My.
Mate. Each word came out separately, dripping with barely controlled murder. Eric could feel his grip tightening, feel Veron's windpipe beginning to collapse, and some distant part of him that still remembered civilization screamed that kings didn't execute prisoners without trial. That part died when he saw Sarah's condition. He released Veron, letting him drop gasping to the snow, and moved to the cage. The lock shattered under his claws. The door ripped free. And there she was. His Sarah. His heart. His mate. Starvation had reduced her to skeleton and fur. Every rib visible. silver-burned scars across her body, some forming words he couldn't process through the red haze of rage. Her swollen belly, their pups, their babies, bore distinct bruises. Boot prints. Fresh bruises still swelling. Someone had kicked his pregnant mate. Deliberately. Recently. The sound that came from Eric's throat wasn't a roar this time. It was grief given voice, raw and terrible and utterly broken. He gathered Sarah's unconscious form with desperate gentleness, cradling her against his massive chest. She was so light. Too light. This body that had been strong and healthy 3 months ago now felt fragile as glass. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm here. I found you. Please, please don't leave me." Her heartbeat was faint but present. The pup's heartbeats, 3 of them, he could feel 3, fluttered beneath his palm. All still alive. All still fighting. Behind him, his elite guard arrived in a thunder of pause and transformation. Commander Thorne took one look at the scene and began securing prisoners with brutal efficiency. Veyron, still gasping, was bound in silver chains. The 5 hunters who'd fled were tracked down within minutes, their terror scent making them easy prey. The Omega, Eric managed, still cradling Sarah. There was an Omega. Where? Here, Your Majesty. Thorne knelt beside the small figure that had fallen when the horse bolted. A young woman, blonde and blood-covered, her skull fractured. Unconscious but breathing. She's alive. Barely. Eric looked at the stranger, who'd somehow been part of this nightmare. Then Sarah's weak mental voice touched his mind. "She saved me.
Protected me.
They came for me." She fought. Understanding crashed through Eric. This Omega, this small, broken woman, had sheltered his mate when the entire kingdom had failed her. Had risked everything, fought trained soldiers, gotten captured trying to protect a queen she'd never met. "Get them both to the royal physicians," Eric commanded, his voice steadying into the authority that had ruled 4 territories for a decade.
"Now."
"And someone find me everything about Lord Dorian's business transactions. Every warehouse, every cage, every name on every document." He looked down at Veyron, who was staring up at him with dawning horror as he realized exactly who he'd been torturing for 3 months. "You're going to tell me everything," Eric said softly, his tone promising things worse than death. "Every location, every buyer, every victim, and then we're going to discuss what happens to men who hurt queens." In the distance, more howls rose, his full army mobilizing, finally given direction after 3 months of helpless searching. They were coming. All of them. And someone was going to burn for what they'd done to his family. Pain woke Nora, a deep, throbbing ache that radiated from her skull down through her ribs.
Clean sheets.
Soft mattress. The scent of healing herbs she didn't recognize. None of this made sense. Veyron's men had been dragging her through the snow. She should be in a cage or dead or worse. She forced her eyes open and immediately wished she hadn't. The room spun viciously, her concussed brain struggling to process the opulence surrounding her. Stone walls hung with tapestries. A fireplace larger than her entire cabin. Windows showing a city sprawling below in the distance. And sitting in a chair beside her bed, a man who made the spacious room feel suddenly small. He was massive, not just tall, but built like violence barely contained in human skin. Dark hair, strong features, and amber eyes that tracked her waking with predatory focus. He radiated barely controlled fury, the kind that made the air feel dangerous. Power rolled off him in waves that made Nora's wolf sense scream recognition even through the pain.
Alpha.
Lycan.
King.
"You're the Omega who saved her," Eric said, his voice rough like he'd been screaming or crying or both. "Sarah told me. You risked everything for a stranger." Memories crashed back, Sarah's broken body, Veyron's cruelty, the fight, the chains. Nora struggled to sit up despite her body's protests. "Is she?" The question came out desperate, raw.
Alive.
Barely. Eric's massive hands clenched on his knees, knuckles going white. "My healers are with her now. They're doing everything possible, but the damage. His voice fractured. They starved her for 3 months, beat her, branded her like livestock, kept her alive just enough to suffer. He looked up, and Nora saw the terrible grief bleeding through his rage. A king who'd failed to protect what mattered most, a husband drowning in helpless guilt. You gave her 3 days of safety when the entire kingdom failed her, Eric continued. When I failed her, you're Omega, exiled. You had every reason to close that door and save yourself, but you opened it anyway. Nora's throat tightened. She needed help. And you almost died giving it. Eric's amber eyes held hers. Sarah showed me what happened. Showed me you fighting 6 trained soldiers with herbs and fire and sheer stubbornness. Showed me you refusing to surrender her even when Veron promised torture. His voice dropped to something lethal. I'm going to kill everyone responsible. Slowly. Starting with the men who touched her and ending with whoever ordered this. Nora recognized the expression on his face. She'd seen it in reflections after her exile. Grief so vast it could only transform into rage or break you completely. Eric was choosing rage, and she understood why. Rage was easier than feeling the helplessness underneath. She's strong, Nora said quietly. Stronger than they knew. She ran for 3 weeks on nothing but willpower and love for you. She survived 3 months of hell because she had something to survive for you and those pups. She held his gaze despite the intensity there. Don't dishonor that strength by becoming the monster who destroys in her name. Eric's expression went cold. They deserve to die. They deserve justice. There's a difference. Is there? His voice carried decades of kingship, of making brutal decisions and living with the weight. When I found her, she had words burned into her ribs. Property. Lot 23. Someone branded my mate like cattle and sold her for profit. You think justice is enough for that? I think vengeance will hollow you out, Nora said, recognizing the truth in her own words. I think Sarah didn't fight to survive so you could become something she wouldn't recognize. And I think... The door burst open. Commander Thorne entered, his expression grim. Your Majesty, you need to see this. Eric stood, his frame blocking Nora's view. This better be urgent, Thorne. We followed the wagon's trail back to its origin point. Found a warehouse 20 miles east. Thorne's jaw clenched. Your Majesty, there were 32 shadow wolves in cages. All pregnant females. All starved nearly to death. Some had already given birth. The pups were gone. But the mothers... He swallowed hard. They'd been broken. Completely. Most couldn't even shift back to human form. The silence that followed was absolute and terrible. 32, Eric repeated, his voice empty of inflection. How long? Records at the site suggest 5 years of operation. Maybe longer. Thorne pulled out a leather-bound ledger, its pages marked with meticulous entries. Sales logs, breeding schedules, client lists from foreign kingdoms. And Your Majesty, every transaction bears the same seal. He opened the ledger to the first page. There, stamped in red wax, was a crest Nora recognized with sickening certainty. Lord Dorian Ashcroft's personal seal. The kingdom's trade minister, Eric said softly, and Nora heard murder in that softness. My father's most trusted advisor. The man who sat on my council for a decade. He turned to Nora. Did you know? Not about the wolves. I knew he was a predator who destroyed women who said no. I knew he killed his wife and blamed me for it. Nora's hands trembled. But this, gods, how many families did he destroy? 32 females, Thorne said grimly. But the sales logs show 83 pups sold over 5 years. Some mothers were clearly used multiple times. 83 pups. 83 babies stolen from their mothers before bonding could occur, sold to foreign experimenters who'd torture them for magical properties until they died. 32 families shattered. 5 years of systematic abuse hiding behind legitimate trade. And the man responsible sat on the royal council, trusted and respected, while his victims died in silence. Eric's transformation started before Nora could speak, fur rippling across his skin, claws extending, amber eyes going molten with alpha power. "Get me Dorian.
Now.
I want him in chains in my throne room within the hour." "Your Majesty," Nora called as he moved toward the door.
Please.
"Don't do this in rage. Do it in justice." Eric paused, his massive frame half-shifted, terrifying and beautiful. Maybe they're the same thing. Then he was gone, taking the storm with him, and Nora was left in the too-quiet room with the certainty that she'd just witnessed a king choosing vengeance over law. And she had no idea if anyone could stop him before he destroyed himself along with his enemies. The palace transformed into a war room within hours. Eric commandeered the Grand Council chamber, covering every surface with evidence, ledgers, maps, correspondence, witness testimonies. What emerged was a conspiracy so vast and methodical it made Nora's stomach turn. Exotic animal trade was the official designation in kingdom records. But the documents told a different story. Foreign kingdoms, the Nordian Dominion, the Eastern Consortium, the Archipelago states, paid fortunes for shadow wolf pups. Not as pets or companions, but as raw materials. Their blood, when harvested before maternal bonding occurred, contained properties that enhanced magical workings. Healing potions became twice as effective. Battle enchantments lasted months instead of weeks. Longevity spells could add decades to a mage's lifespan. The pups never survived the harvesting process past age 2. The breeding operation was designed with horrific efficiency. Pregnant shifters were captured near term, kept alive through gestation with minimal resources, then processed immediately after birth. The pups were removed before the maternal bond could form. That attachment apparently diminished the blood's potency. Mothers who survived were either discarded or, if deemed premium stock, cycled back into captivity for future pregnancies. Sarah had been classified as premium. The notation in the ledger made Eric's hand shake. Royal bloodline. Excellent health prior to acquisition. 3 viable pups. Projected value: 50,000 gold. Processing scheduled for winter solstice. She'd escaped 5 days before her scheduled delivery date. Nora sat across from Eric as he worked, her own story finally finding voice after 6 months of exile. "I was palace herbalist for 2 years before Dorian noticed me. He started with compliments. How skilled I was, how much he appreciated my work. Then the gifts, expensive herbs, rare texts, things far too valuable for staff." Her hands clenched in her lap. "When I tried to refuse politely, he got more aggressive. Caught me alone in storage rooms. Made comments about how Omegas should be grateful for noble attention." Eric's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "His wife came to me dying. Bruises she tried to hide. Internal bleeding from repeated trauma. She begged me not to report it, said Dorian would kill her if she caused trouble. I treated what I could, but she was too far gone." Nora's voice steadied, anger replacing shame. "The day she died, Dorian told the council I'd been seducing him for months. That when he refused my advances, I poisoned his wife with abortifacients out of jealousy. They believed him immediately. Powerful noble against worthless Omega. You tried to save his victim, so he destroyed you," Eric said quietly. "And exiled me where I die quietly, without causing further embarrassment." Nora met his eyes. "That's what men like Dorian do. They don't just hurt you. They make sure no one believes you afterward." Eric's investigation found 12 other women with similar stories. A merchant's daughter who'd rejected Dorian's proposition. Her family's business mysteriously burned a week later, destroying their livelihood. A servant who'd complained about his wandering hands, accused of theft and imprisoned. A healer from the western province who'd treated injuries suspiciously consistent with Dorian's schedule, her practice license revoked for negligence. A pattern spanning 15 years. Dorian didn't just traffic wolves. He was a serial predator who'd perfected weaponizing his position against anyone who threatened his power. While Eric built his case, Sarah's condition worsened. The starvation had damaged her too profoundly. Her body was consuming itself trying to sustain 3 pups it couldn't support. The royal healers spoke in careful, devastating terms. The queen might survive with aggressive intervention, but the pup's chances diminished with each passing day. Sarah's grief was a palpable thing, bleeding through the mate bond until Eric couldn't function without feeling her despair. Nora spent hours at her bedside while the healers worked, holding Sarah's weakened hand, sharing survival stories. "You're still breathing," Nora whispered during one particularly dark night when Sarah's heartbeat faltered. "That means you're still fighting. They tried to break us both, tried to make us believe we were worth nothing. But we're here. We survived. Don't let them take that from you." Sarah's mental voice was barely a thread. What if surviving isn't enough? What if I live and they die anyway? Then we honor them by making sure this never happens to another mother. We turn our survival into something that matters. Nora squeezed her hand. "But they're still fighting too. I can feel their heartbeats. Don't give up on them yet." When palace guards finally arrested Dorian at his estate 3 days later, he came willingly, almost amused. They dragged him through the palace in chains, past council members who'd trusted him, past servants who'd feared him, straight to the throne room where Eric waited with murder in his eyes. Dorian saw Nora standing beside the throne and smiled, cold, confident, utterly unafraid. "Little Nora. Still causing problems, I see." His voice carried the same charming warmth he'd used when offering her gifts. "You think you've won? You think finding some paperwork changes anything?" He looked directly at Eric. "The king is weak. He's been weak since the day he took the crown. This kingdom has always protected men like me, men who understand that power is meant to be used, not wasted on sentiment." Eric rose from his throne, and every wolf in the room felt the alpha command that rolled off him in waves. "You traffic my mate. I traded in exotic animals as authorized by kingdom commerce law," Dorian corrected smoothly. "If your wife was mistakenly processed, that's an administrative error. Unfortunate, but hardly criminal. You branded her, starved her, beat her while she carried my children." Dorian's smile never wavered. "Prove it was me specifically. You'll find my name on no operational documents. Only business contracts. Legal, properly executed business contracts." His eyes found Nora again. "Just like you couldn't prove what happened to my wife. The powerful make the rules, little Omega. We always have. We always will." The terrible part was his confidence. Even now, facing the kingdom's most powerful alpha with evidence of atrocities spanning 5 years, Dorian believed he'd walk free. And looking at Eric's barely controlled rage, Nora realized he might be right about one thing. Vengeance dressed as justice was still just vengeance. And kingdoms couldn't be built on rage, no matter how righteous. The trial was supposed to be civilized, formal testimonies, documented evidence, proper legal procedure. It lasted exactly 40 minutes before civilization shattered completely. Eric had arranged for all 32 rescued wolves to testify. They came in human form, some still bearing visible scars, others trembling so badly they could barely stand. One by one, they described abduction from their homes, silver chains burning flesh, forced starvation designed to break spirits without killing bodies. A mother from the northern forests described watching her newborn pups taken while she was still bleeding from birth, their cries cutting off abruptly as they were carried into another room. She never saw them again. Another spoke of being cycled through 3 pregnancies over 18 months, each time losing her young before she could even scent them properly. "They kept me alive with just enough food to conceive again. My body wasn't mine anymore. I was just production." The throne room was silent except for muffled weeping. Even the hardest nobles looked shaken. The evidence was undeniable, ledgers showing 83 pups sold over 5 years, none surviving past age 2. Sales receipts from foreign kingdoms detailing premium shadow wolf juvenile blood and its applications in magical enhancement. Breeding schedules tracking ovulation cycles like agricultural rotation charts. Dorian sat in chains throughout, his expression one of patient boredom. When Eric finally allowed him to speak, he rose with the easy confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences. "They're animals," Dorian said simply. "Breeding stock. The trade was perfectly legal under exotic commerce statutes established 60 years ago. I followed every regulation, filed every permit, paid every tax. He gestured to the weeping wolves. These creatures were treated better than livestock in most kingdoms. Fed, sheltered, given medical care. The fact that they're here crying about it simply proves they lack the intelligence to understand business. The temperature in the throne room dropped. Eric rose from his throne slowly, deliberately, alpha power radiating from him like heat from a forge. My mate is not livestock. Your mate was catalogued as Lot 23, premium breeding stock, awaiting processing, Dorian corrected with infuriating calm. If there was a clerical error in her acquisition, I'm happy to offer compensation. These families are not commerce. According to kingdom law, they absolutely are. I have 60 years of legal precedent. And you are not walking out of this room alive. The court held its collective breath. Nora watched Eric's control cracking in real time. 3 months of desperate searching, the horror of finding Sarah broken and branded, the helpless guilt of a husband who'd failed to protect what mattered most. All of it was transforming into murder, and everyone in the room could feel it building. Dorian smiled. Actually smiled. Go ahead, Your Majesty. Become the monster. Prove that crown means nothing when emotions take over. Show your kingdom that might makes right after all. He spread his chained hands. Kill me here, in front of your court, without trial or law. Demonstrate that you're no different than the animals you're defending, ruled by instinct, incapable of civilized restraint. It was perfectly calculated provocation. Dorian was gambling everything on one truth. If Eric killed him in rage, it would undermine every legal reform the king tried to implement afterward. It would prove Dorian's entire worldview, that power, not law, was all that mattered. Eric's transformation began. Bones cracking.
Claws extending.
Fur rippling across his skin. His Lycan form was massive, terrifying, designed for tearing apart threats to his pack. He crossed the distance between throne and prisoner in 3 strides, moving with predatory grace. His clawed hand closed around Dorian's throat, lifting him off the ground effortlessly. The throne room erupted in chaos. Some nobles screamed for justice, others for mercy. Most simply froze in terror watching their king lose himself to vengeance. Dorian's feet dangled above the marble floor, but even choking, he managed something like a smile. He was winning. Even dying, he was proving his point. Nora moved before conscious thought caught up. She ran forward, throwing herself between Eric and his prey, or rather, beneath them, since Dorian was currently suspended in the air. Stop. Please stop. Eric's amber eyes were wild, barely recognizing her. His grip on Dorian's throat tightened. Get out of the way, Nora.
No.
Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He doesn't deserve mercy. Then let me finish this. He doesn't deserve mercy, Nora repeated, holding Eric's gaze despite the primal terror screaming at her to run from a predator in killing mode. But you deserve better than becoming him. Eric's claws drew blood. Dorian's face was turning purple. He trafficked my mate. Starved her. Beat her while she carried my children. He deserves to die screaming.
Yes.
He does. Nora stepped closer, putting herself in range of those claws. But Sarah didn't survive so you could become a murderer. She didn't fight through 3 months of hell so you could prove Dorian right. That power is all that matters, that laws mean nothing when emotions take over. She's dying. Eric's voice broke, raw and bleeding. The healers say the pups won't survive. She might not survive. And he did this. He destroyed everything, and he's standing there smiling about it. I know. Nora's own eyes burned with unshed tears. I know it's not fair. I know he deserves worse than death. But if you kill him like this, you're telling every victim in this room that justice is a lie. That the system that protected him will keep protecting men like him because the only law is who's strongest. She gestured to the 32 wolves watching with haunted eyes. They need to know speaking up matters. That even the most powerful predator will face consequences. Not just a stronger predator's vengeance, but actual justice. Her voice strengthened. Sarah survived because someone chose compassion over cruelty. Honor that. Be the king who chooses justice even when rage feels righteous. Eric's hand trembled. Dorian's face had gone from purple to blue. The entire court watched the king war with himself, vengeance screaming for blood, civilization demanding restraint. Slowly, agonizingly, Eric's claws retracted. He dropped Dorian, who fell gasping to the marble floor. The king turned to his council, his voice carrying absolute authority despite the grief bleeding through it. Lord Dorian Ashcroft, you are guilty of trafficking, torture, conspiracy, and 83 counts of murder. Sentence: life imprisonment with magical binding to prevent harm to others. Your estate becomes Shadow Wolf Sanctuary. Your fortune compensates the families you destroyed. He looked down at Dorian, still struggling to breathe. You wanted to prove I'm no better than an animal? Congratulations. You lose anyway, because this animal chooses law. Nora watched the rage drain from Eric's eyes, replaced by something harder and more permanent. Not forgiveness, not peace, but the conscious choice to build something better than revenge. Eric's hand trembled at Dorian's throat, and Nora watched murder and mercy war behind those amber eyes. Every instinct the Lycan king possessed screamed for blood, for ripping apart the man who destroyed his mate, who trafficked innocent families, who stood there even now with that infuriating confidence that powerful men never truly faced consequences. Nora held his gaze, refusing to look away despite every survival instinct telling her to flee from a predator in killing mode. I know you want him dead. I want him dead. Every survivor in this room wants him dead. Then why stop me? Eric's voice was barely human, caught between man and beast. Because if you kill him like this, you're telling the kingdom that power trumps law. That whoever is strongest makes the rules. Nora gestured to the 32 rescued wolves watching with haunted, desperate eyes. They've lived in a world where might made right for 5 years. Where their suffering didn't matter because they weren't powerful enough to stop it. Don't prove that world was correct. Eric's claws drew fresh blood from Dorian's neck. They need to see justice. They need to know the system will protect them now, Nora countered. That speaking up matters. That even the most powerful predator will face consequences, not just a stronger predator's vengeance, but actual justice that applies to everyone. He broke her. Eric's voice cracked completely, grief flooding through the rage. For 3 months, he tortured my mate, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't find her. I failed her. Nora stepped closer, close enough to touch. I know, but you can stop it from happening again. You can build something better than revenge. She might die, Eric whispered. The healers say she might die, and he'll still be breathing. Then honor her strength by making sure no one else suffers what she did. Don't become the monster who proves him right about power. The silence stretched impossibly long. Dorian's face had gone beyond purple to a sickly blue. His eyes were bulging, consciousness fading. 1 more minute of pressure and he'd be dead, and part of Nora desperately wanted Eric to finish it. Wanted to watch Dorian pay with the same suffering he'd inflicted. But she'd learned something in 6 months of exile, in 3 days of sheltering a dying wolf, in this moment standing between a king and his vengeance. Mercy wasn't about what the guilty deserved. It was about who you chose to be when rage felt righteous. Eric's hand opened. Dorian fell to the marble floor with a wet, gasping sound, clutching his throat and sucking air. The king stepped back, his transformation reversing slowly, fur receding, claws retracting, humanity returning to features that had gone purely predatory. When he spoke, his voice carried the absolute authority of 10 years ruling 4 territories. Lord Dorian Ashcroft, you are guilty of trafficking, torture, conspiracy, and 83 counts of murder. Each word fell like a judge's gavel. Sentence: life imprisonment with magical binding to prevent harm to others. Your estate becomes Shadow Wolf Sanctuary. Your fortune compensates the families you destroyed. He turned to where Captain Veron stood in chains, along with 12 other men who'd enabled the operation. Same sentence. All of you. No exceptions. No appeals. No mercy. The court erupted in whispers, some approving, others shocked, all processing that their king had chosen law over vengeance. Then Eric did something no one expected. Something unprecedented in the kingdom's 1,000-year history. He walked to the center of the throne room where the 32 rescued wolves stood, still bearing scars and trauma and the hollow eyes of those who'd survived hell.
And he knelt.
Not the formal kneel of ceremony, but the full prostration of absolute submission, forehead touching marble, arms spread, vulnerable. "I failed you," Eric said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. "My kingdom failed you. For 5 years. You suffered while I sat on this throne believing our systems worked, believing justice existed. I was wrong." One of the rescued mothers made a broken sound. Several others began weeping. "I cannot undo what was done," Eric continued. "Cannot give back the years stolen, the children lost, the innocence destroyed. But I can make this oath before every witness here. No one will traffic, abuse, or experiment on shifters again in my kingdom. And anyone who tries will face not vengeance, but justice, the kind that applies to nobles and commoners alike." He raised his head, meeting each wolf's eyes in turn. "I am rewriting every law that allowed this to happen, establishing protections with teeth, creating oversight that cannot be corrupted. And I am appointing survivors to positions of power because those who've lived through hell know best how to prevent it." Slowly, impossibly, one of the wolves stepped forward. A young mother who'd lost 2 litters to the operation. She touched Eric's bowed head with trembling fingers. "We believe you," she whispered. Others came forward, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. Touching the king who'd admitted failure, who'd chosen mercy over rage, who'd voluntarily limited his own power for their protection. Some wept. Others remained silent. But all bore witness to something they'd thought impossible. A predator choosing compassion. A king admitting he'd been wrong. Power acknowledging it had failed the powerless, and choosing to do better. Nora watched from her position beside the throne, tears streaming down her face. This was what justice looked like. Not vengeance dressed up in legal language, but the hard, uncomfortable work of building systems that protected the vulnerable even when rage screamed for blood. Dorian lay on the floor still gasping, his perfect confidence finally cracking. He'd gambled everything on Eric becoming the monster. Instead, he'd witnessed a king choosing something infinitely more dangerous to men like him: actual accountability. Eric rose finally, his eyes finding Nora across the throne room. No words were necessary. She'd given him the strength to choose mercy when every instinct demanded murder. And in doing so, they'd both discovered that justice and compassion weren't opposites. They were the foundation of everything worth building. 3 months changed everything. Nora stood at the entrance to the Shadow Wolf Sanctuary, watching sunrise paint the valley in shades of gold and rose. Behind her, Dorian's former estate had been transformed beyond recognition. The breeding cages were torn down, their metal melted, and reforged into garden gates. The torture chambers had been sealed with stone and blessing, their darkness buried under foundation for healing pools. Where prisoners had once suffered in darkness, survivor families now planted gardens, literal and metaphorical hope taking root in soil that had only known cruelty. 32 families were healing here, slowly but visibly. Some days were harder than others. Nightmares still came. Scars, physical and otherwise, didn't fade on convenient timelines. But laughter had returned to the valley. Children played. Mothers gathered in the communal spaces, sharing stories. The hollow-eyed desperation Nora had seen in the throne room was gradually being replaced by something fragile but growing, the belief that safety might actually last. Eric had appointed her royal shadow wolf protector, a newly created position overseeing not just the sanctuary but kingdom-wide abuse prevention. The title felt surreal some days. 6 months ago, she'd been exiled Omega worth less than firewood. Now she sat on the royal council alongside 3 other Omegas whose voices carried equal weight to nobles who'd once dismissed them. The trafficking laws had been completely rewritten. Any trade involving sentient beings required verification of consent, regular inspections, and survivor oversight. Foreign kingdoms initially protested the new restrictions on commerce. Eric's response had been simple. Any kingdom that wanted trade access would comply with protections, or lose the economic alliance entirely. Most had chosen compliance. Most importantly, survivors were believed now. When someone came forward with abuse allegations, the system's first response was investigation and protection, not dismissal based on the accused's social standing. In the sanctuary's heart, Sarah rested in a sun-warmed garden clearing with 3 tiny pups tumbling over her legs. They'd been born small, dangerously small, the healers had warned. But they were fighters, inheriting their mother's stubborn refusal to let trauma win. Sarah had named them Hope, Mercy, and Justice. "The 3 things I thought I'd lost," she told Nora during their first visit after the birth. "The 3 things you gave back when you opened that door." Nora had cried then, holding the tiny lives that shouldn't have survived, marveling at how something as simple as choosing compassion could ripple outward into kingdom-changing transformation. Eric found her as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sanctuary in amber light. The rage that had consumed him during the trial had finally left his eyes, replaced by something softer. Grief that was healing instead of destroying. Peace that came from choosing mercy even when vengeance felt righteous. "I almost became him," he said quietly, standing beside her. "Almost let rage make me the monster Dorian wanted me to be. But you didn't." Nora leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in a way that would have been unthinkable months ago. Omega and King, finding solidarity in shared understanding of what mercy cost. That's what matters. They watched Sarah's pups play, tiny and fierce and beautifully alive, unaware they were living proof that the broken could heal. Nora thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, silenced, shamed, exiled for refusing to be a predator's victim. She believed her compassion made her weak, that survival required hardening her heart. Instead, that stubborn insistence on mercy had changed a kingdom, had saved a queen, had built systems that would protect vulnerable people for generations. Movement caught her attention. A young Omega was approaching hesitantly up the sanctuary path, bearing visible bruises and the particular fierce stiffness of someone who'd learned to make themselves small. She couldn't have been more than 17. Nora moved to meet her, recognizing that expression. She'd worn it herself once. The girl's voice trembled. "I need help. Someone hurt me, and nobody believes me, because he's important. His family has money, and I'm just," her voice broke. "They said I was lying, that I wanted attention. But he hurt me, and I don't know what to do." Nora knelt to her level, holding her gaze with absolute certainty. "I believe you, and we will make sure you're safe. That's my oath." The girl's tears came then, relief and terror and hope all mixed together in the messy, complicated way healing always began. Nora held her while she cried, feeling Eric's solid presence beside them, knowing the full weight of the sanctuary and kingdom resources would mobilize to protect this child. This was what justice looked like. Not dramatic throne room confrontations, but the quiet, daily work of believing survivors and holding predators accountable regardless of their power. Eric watched Nora comfort the young Omega, watched families healing throughout the sanctuary, felt his mate's warmth and contentment through their bond. Vengeance had felt righteous in his rage, had promised catharsis and closure. But mercy was building something that would outlast them all. Systems that protected the vulnerable. Laws with teeth. A kingdom where speaking up mattered because people actually listened. "Tell me," he said as the sun set over the sanctuary, painting everything in shades of hope. "How do we make sure this never happens again?" Nora smiled, watching Sarah's pups tumble over each other in play. "We teach the kingdom that the measure of civilization isn't how we treat the powerful, it's how we protect the vulnerable. We make sure every voice matters, that systems believe survivors first and investigate thoroughly. And we remember that justice without mercy is just revenge in disguise. The three pups, Hope, Mercy, and Justice, tumbled over to investigate the newcomers with puppy curiosity. Golden-eyed and laughing, unaware they were living proof that mercy and justice could coexist. That the broken could heal. That trauma didn't have to define you forever. That even in the darkest winter, when exile felt like death and hope seemed foolish, someone might still choose to open the door. And that choice, that simple, dangerous, compassionate choice, could change everything. Nora held the crying girl and watched the sun set over families learning to feel safe again. 6 months ago, she dragged a dying wolf across her threshold and whispered that mercy still mattered. Now she knew with absolute certainty, mercy didn't just matter. It was the foundation of everything worth building, everything worth becoming, everything worth surviving for. And the kingdom was finally learning that lesson, one open door at a time.